Okay, we are going to um, finish Red Scarf Girl. There is a writing assignment that is going to come from this book, so everybody needs to hear it. So we're on An Educable Child. We've got about this much left. Grandma cried whenever she thought about Dad, and Mom was not getting any better, so I stayed home to help. While Jiang and Jiyun were in school during the day, I shopped and sewed and worried. It was hard for me to keep my mind off Dad and the scene shop foreman's threats. The German clock struck 4 times. I was finishing the last sleeve of a jacket for Jiyun before starting to make dinner when I heard a soft voice calling me from the alley. Who could it be? And Yi always came directly upstairs, and none of my junior high school friends knew where I lived. I put down the sleeve and went to the French window. It was Lin Lin, eye catching in her yellow corduroy jacket. She was shivering in the freezing wind. After a false spring, the weather had turned cold again. This is a surprise, I said as I led her inside. How did you get my address? From Teacher Zhang. He wanted somebody to bring you a message about a meeting at school tomorrow, and I volunteered. You haven't been to school for days. I wondered if you were sick or something. She gave me her shy smile and fidgeted with the fringe of her scarf as if expecting a reproach. I gave her a glass of hot water to warm her up. You're sewing, she said when she saw the patterns and cloth spread all over the bed and table. Uh-huh, I smiled and nodded. You can sew? Did you make all these? Did your mom teach you how? I laughed. No one taught me. I showed her the instruction book that I had found in a bookstore. I learned from here. I just make a paper pattern, and when it looks right, I pin it to the cloth and cut. That's great. I tried to learn once, but I just couldn't do it. I tried so hard to make a dress, but in the end, I had to ask my mother to finish it for me. My shoulders were aching from bending over the sewing machine all day, and I swung my arms back and forth to relax them. If you had to do it, you'd learn. I meant what I said. If Lin Lin's family had to live on just 60 yuan a month and half of their clothes had been confiscated, she would learn to sew too. She blinked her eyes and changed the subject. Why haven't you come to school all this time? My mom's been sick. Is it serious? Yes, she has Meniere's syndrome. Sometimes she gets so dizzy that she passes out. My mother has intestinal angina. When she gets an attack, her belly hurts so much she rolls around on her bed. Before I could answer, Ziyang walked in with Grandma following him eagerly. How was it? Did you see your dad? Grandma did not even notice our presence. Ziyang gloomily shook his head. In the reception room, they were packing apples to sell to the staff, and I asked them if I could buy some for Dad. One of them said, Buy apples for your father? You think he's in the hospital or something? And they all laughed. I'm never going back there. I looked at Lin Lin with embarrassment. She immediately stood up and said, It's late. I better be going. I went downstairs to see her off, and neither of us spoke. Thanks for coming. I opened the door for her. Oh, I almost forgot. Here is your math exercise notebook. I put the assignment sheet in it. Don't forget the meeting tomorrow, 4 o'clock in the auditorium. My hand was still on the doorknob. Suddenly, without thinking, I said, My dad has been detained for interrogation. I surprised myself when I said it. I had not meant to tell her, and I did not know why I trusted her so much for after such a short time. We looked at each other for a while, and finally she said softly, I understand. Our house was searched, too. She turned and walked away. I watched her doll like figure retreating through the cold wind, and somehow I felt much warmer. The meeting had already begun when I arrived at the auditorium the next day. I sat down right by the door. The leader of the school revolutionary committee, Chairman Jin, was making a speech on the current revolutionary situation. On the stage beside him were Teacher Hao, a revolutionary committee member, and to my surprise, Chang Hong. What sort of meeting was this? I looked around to see who was there. There were several Red Guard committee members and key people from the propaganda group, along with several members of the Revolutionary Performance Team and the Mao Zedong Thought Study Group. Beishan was sitting near the door, bending over the paper in his lap. Was this about the propaganda group again? I had told Chang Hong once already that I wouldn't join. No, that would not require such a formal meeting. While I was still guessing, Chairman Jin finished his summary of the steadily improving revolutionary situation. Comrades, he suddenly raised the pitch of his voice. In order to support the Cultural Revolution and promote class struggle, our school's Red Guard Committee has decided to make a class education exhibition to expose the class enemies, evil, and remind us of the misery of the old society and our happiness today. This will inspire our students' revolutionary enthusiasm and further promote the Cultural Revolution in our school. Every student here today was handpicked for both academic and political excellence. You will represent all the teachers and students of our school when we celebrate the Communist Party birthday on July 1st. Academic and political excellence? There must have been a mistake. Even though my classmates didn't know me very well, the teachers certainly knew about my family background. My personal file recorded everything. I imagine the sneers, political excellence, a black whelp criticizing landlords. In the middle of Chang Hong's speech on behalf of the Red Guard Committee, I slipped unnoticed out of the auditorium and headed for Teacher Zhang's office. The stairway in the old office building was dark and narrow. At a landing, I almost bumped into someone coming down. It was Teacher Zhang himself. Teacher Zhang, I stammered, caught unprepared. I was coming to see you. Oh, is there something I can help you with? Would you like to come to my office? That's all right. It won't take long. I swallowed and calmed down a little. I was told to attend the meeting about the exhibition. Did you know that? I started cautiously. I was the one who suggested your name. Did you go? How was it? He asked lightly. Oh, the meeting was fine, but I struggled to find the appropriate words. But I'm not really a leader, am I? I shook my head slightly and tried to smile. He didn't answer my question. I was told you were in the children's arts troupe. Is that true? Um, your Mandarin is excellent and you won several speech contests. Is that right? Well, that was in primary school a long time ago. How did you know? I felt like he was cornering me. I think you're the perfect one to represent our class as a guide at the exhibition. Oh, no, no, I blurted out. My own grandfather was a landlord. How could I condemn the evil landlords of the old society? What if Yin Lanlan or Du Hei saw me? Teacher Zhang, I'm sure there's someone in our class who can do a better job. You'd better find someone else. I've thought it over. I think you are the best one. Zhang Zhili, this is an important political assignment. I hope you will accept it and try to win honor for our class. All right? I almost lost the courage to refuse again, but I thought of my landlord grandfather, of Dad detained at the theater. Teacher Zhang, did you ever look at my file? It took an effort to ask the question. If he knew about the speech contest, then he must know about Grandpa and about the Red Guards searching our apartment. His face was expressionless as he moved his hand from the railing and put it in his pocket. He did not reply immediately. We cannot choose our families or our class status, but we can choose our own futures. He spoke very slowly and clearly. No, you are not a leader, but you are still an educable child. You can overcome your family background. He paused. You have self esteem and you always try to excel. That's why I believe you are brave enough to face and eventually overcome the difficulties of life. It was very dark on the stairs. Everything appeared dim except for his piercing, shining eyes. I felt an older brother's sincerity and trust in his look. Brave enough to face and eventually overcome the difficulties of life. I repeated to myself and felt something catch in my throat. I'll do it, I said simply and walked away. I was afraid I would cry if I said another word. The sun was setting and the western sky was a sheet of gold and rose. I stopped, my heart full of awe at the immensity of the world. I had wanted to give up. I had almost stopped trying to be brave, to be an educable child. I saw another part of myself, a part full of fear that I had to struggle against. I would not allow myself to stop trying to follow Chairman Mayo. Whatever my family background was, I would overcome all difficulties. My future would be bright. As it grew dark, the whole city seemed to slow down. The school, too, was no longer its bustling daytime self. Only the propaganda group office was ablaze with light, like a brightly lit cabin in the middle of a dark and silent forest. On the other side of the room, Beishan and some other boys were painting a picture in preparation for the class education exhibition. We girls were sitting around a big table gluing dyed millet grains onto a huge sheet of paper to make a portrait of Chairman Mayo. It's taken us 6 hours just to finish two eyebrows and the ears. This is going to be a long job, a girl said. She spoke quickly and loudly, sounding just like her nickname, Ducky. If I'd known that it was going to take this long, I would have said, let's just draw something, Fang Fang grumbled. Come on, we all agreed to do this. Chang Hong moved quickly to put down the disagreement. She pointed at Ducky with her tweezers. You said that we should do something new and different. She turned to Fang Fang. And you said that the three-dimensional millet grains would look better and show our loyalty to Chairman Mayo better than a drawing. Do you remember? I didn't say I wanted to quit. I just said it's slow, Ducky said sulkily. We'd better stop arguing and get back to work, I said. Otherwise, we'll never finish. I looked up at the boys' table and hoped they were not laughing at our squabbling. Let's take a break, Chang Hong suggested. Have some steamed buns while I go make some tea. If we just march on resolutely, we are bound to succeed. She threw a bag of buns on the table and ran out. No one said anything. Ducky took a bun and bit into it. That afternoon we couldn't wait to start. We had all bustled around boiling water and dyeing millet and getting snacks. The enthusiasm had reminded me of the glorious revolutionary activities that I had seen in the movies. We were proud to be a part of the revolution, excited to be doing such an important job. Now, only a few hours later, the enthusiasm had completely disappeared. We had not anticipated that the job would take so long. Now it seemed that we would have to work all night to finish before tomorrow's meeting. I couldn't help yawning. This would be the fourth time I had worked all night since we had started to prepare the exhibition. Although it was months away, there were so many things to do, so many deadlines to meet, deciding on the contents of the exhibition, writing the script, designing the layout, decorating the exhibition hall. I was amazed at how I could do so much and still leave time for study and housework. Jiangs, one of the boys called me. I was surprised to find it was Beishan. It was the first time that I had ever heard him call me by name. The painting is done. When Chang Hong comes back, tell her we've gone home. He started to go, then stopped and gestured toward the painting. Don't touch it. It's not dry yet. As soon as the boys left, we rushed over to look at their picture. It was a Chinese ink painting. The rising sun was spreading its rays, and a rooster was crowing loudly and joyfully. The rooster sings, for the east is turning red, Ducky read loudly. Wow, what a great picture. And the handwriting is so beautiful, too, I added. Beishan is really talented, isn't he? He does everything so well. You like him, don't you, Li? I think he likes you, too. He's always looking at you, Ducky said suddenly. Don't be so childish, I snapped. Having my name connected with a boy's was the last thing I needed. Things were hard enough as it was. Spare me your dirty gossip, all right? Just in time, Chang Hong came rushing in. Here's the tea. What's up? Oh, they're finished. Let me have a look. She elbowed her way to the front. What do you think? It's really wonderful, isn't it? Ducky gushed. Hmm. Chang Hong considered. Why isn't the sun painted red? Since the title is The Rooster Sings, for the East is turning red. The sun should be red, shouldn't it? Her hand was almost touching the painting. Ever since Bei Shan had left self-study class that day, Chang Hong had seemed to disapprove of him. She was, after all, a Red Guard committee member, and she suspected him of disrespect toward Chairman Mayo. I gently moved her hand away. This is an ink painting. It only uses black ink. By 3 o'clock in the morning, we could hardly stay awake. Tea and snacks could no longer stimulate our exhausted minds. We yawned in turn as if we were counting off in formation. As soon as Chang Hong suggested that we take turns sleeping, Ducky and Fang Fang leaned their heads on the table and fell fast asleep. Chang Hong and I washed our faces in cold water and soldiered on toward Chairman Mayo's collar. Outside our office, the world seemed to disappear. The dark silence seemed to gradually thicken until even time could not move as usual. Each minute seemed endless. My eyes were dry and heavy, and I could not control my hands. I had to try over and over to pick up each grain of millet. I wished I could go home to sleep under my own warm quilt. Home, I sighed. There was still no news about Dad. Mom had secretly asked Uncle Tian for information. but all we knew was that Dad still refused to confess and had been the victim of several struggle meetings. I could not think of those meetings without thinking of the scene shop foreman's icy stare. I could not help wondering what Dad had done. I sighed again. What's the matter? Chang Hong raised her sleepy eyes. Oh, I'm just sleepy, I guess. A moment later, Chang Hong said to me softly, Jili, I envy you so much. Envy me? Why? I was surprised beyond politeness. You're so good in school and so talented. Oh, that doesn't mean anything. Looking into her earnest eyes, I blurted out, I envy you. You have such a good family and such a good political status. She looked down at the table blankly, and after a long while she spoke again, slowly and softly. My brother has epilepsy. He's 11, but he can't dress himself or feed himself. She paused. He has seizures every day, at least one or two, sometimes more. That's terrible. I could say nothing more. I love him very much. She raised her eyes again to look at me. I'm his favorite. Sometimes he won't eat when my mother tries to feed him, but if I do it, he will. I could hardly believe that this person was the revolutionary Chang Hong I knew. Will he will he die? I could not stop myself from asking. She looked down at the table again. It seemed like a long time before she answered. The doctors say he won't live past his teens. We just don't know. He's not in very good shape these days. Why don't you stay home with him? In case. I've thought about that. She looked away from my face to the litter on the table. But we can't allow personal matters to interfere with revolutionary duties, especially for an important political assignment like the exhibition. Watching her sincere and earnest eyes, I completely forgot that she was a Red Guard committee member. Through the quiet of the early morning, we talked and talked, like friends or sisters. By the time our classmates arrived at school the next day, we had finally completed the picture, made with thousands of millet grains and thousands of yawns. But we could not enjoy our accomplishment or the praise of teachers and classmates. We put our heads on the table and fell fast asleep. Let's see. Questions. Day two. This is notes. This is from Sarita. I'm impressed that so little is needed to restore hope to Ji Li. Her teacher just says a few small truths about her, that she can overcome her family background, that she has self esteem and desire to excel, that she is brave enough to face and overcome difficulties in life. This is enough to spur her on again. May we be willing to offer an encouraging word that brings hope. Ji Li and her friends stay up all night doing such foolish things as gluing dyed millet grains onto a piece of paper to make a portrait of Chairman Mayo. Let's not waste our time in equivalent foolish pursuits. She says in the book, for the first time in my life, I thought maybe there really was a God who had heard the prayers Grandma had been saying every night since Dad had been detained. That was on page 207, the last thing that we read. It's interesting that in an atheist culture, Ji Li knows nothing of God, but her grandma, who was not raised an atheist, prays, so that the prayers are an introduction to God. And it says, how does the painful scene with Shan Shan affect Ji Li later? And we have not gotten to that part yet. I'll need to continue reading. What time is it? Yes, we have time to continue. This chapter is called Half City Jiangs. Finally, one May evening, Uncle Tian brought us some thrilling news. Dad was cleared of the charge of listening to foreign radio. It turned out that Uncle Zhu, not Uncle Fan, was to blame. Uncle Zhu had been detained himself and had wanted to improve his own situation by cooperating with the investigation. He had made up the story about the foreign radio, thinking that if he confessed to something, he'd be treated with leniency. And when Dad steadily denied his participation, the theater people got angrier and angrier. They pressed Uncle Zhu for details, and he stupidly told them that he and Dad had used a transistor radio which they had buried in Zhu's courtyard. The theater people went straight to Zhu's house and tore up the courtyard looking for the evidence, but they found nothing. They were furious and gave Uncle Zhu a good beating, and finally he admitted to making up the whole story. What a terrible man, I thought, worse than a traitor. At least a traitor betrays people by telling the truth. Uncle Zhu tried to save himself by telling lies. We were all overjoyed that Dad would be coming home. Grandma was in tears, and she could not stop thanking Allah for his blessing. Mom seemed much better, and Ji kept pestering Grandma to buy shrimp, Dad's favorite food, for his homecoming. For the first time in my life, I thought maybe there really was a God who had heard the prayers Grandma had been saying every night since Dad had been detained. I had the window over the sink open, and warm air blew over my face as I rinsed the vegetables and put the rice on the stove. I heard steps on the stairs and thought it was Mom coming back from the doctor. But when I turned around, I saw Dad. I shouted. Grandma and Ji Yoon came running out the door, and as we met on the landing, Dad lifted his arms to embrace us. Then he immediately lowered them and glanced over his shoulder at the two stern men who were right behind him. Ji Yong pounded up the stairs and pushed between the men, and then stopped. I came to get some clothes, Dad said. Aren't you coming back to stay? Ji Yong asked, and we all looked at Dad, and he just shook his head. We're going to have shrimp, Ji Yoon announced hopefully. Grandma started to say something and then looked at Dad's two escorts and shut her mouth. She hurried away to open the chest, and the rest of us followed Dad slowly into the apartment. Even Ji Yoon was silent now. It had been 3 months since I had seen him last. He looked smaller. His old blue jacket hung loosely on his body, and his back stooped wearily. His shaggy hair hung over his collar, and the black stubble on his face made his eyes seem even more sunken. We all looked at each other, wanting to ask so many questions, but not daring to say anything in front of the guards. Grandma hurried up and laid a pile of clothes on the table. Her hands shook, and so did Dad's as he took the bag she handed him. He slowly sorted through the clothes and put some of them in his bag. Something wet fell on the page. I looked up. A tear rolled down Dad's cheek, and another. He wiped it away, but as soon as he did, another took its place. I had never seen Dad cry before. Soon I was crying too, and so was Ji Yoon, and we all wept along with him. Let's go, bring your clothes, one of the men ordered. Dad picked up his bag and looked at us. I'm going. Be good. Tell your mother to take care of herself. He turned toward Grandma, but then turned his eyes away. Goodbye, Mother. And he quickly followed the two men down the stairs. We clung to each other as we watched him go. We all dashed up to the roof to watch him walk down the alley. He walked a little in front of his escorts. The triangle made by the three heads grew smaller and smaller. Dad! Ji Yoon finally shouted, but he had already vanished around the corner. A week passed, and Dad still had not come home, and no one knew why. As I came up the stairs after school, Mom was just seeing a man and a woman out the door, and I had never seen them before, and I immediately wondered if they had come with news about Dad. Leaning weakly on the doorframe, Mom politely said, Please take care, several times, but the visitors went straight downstairs without making any response. I walked into the room and saw 2 cups of tea on the table, no longer hot, but obviously untouched. Grandma had collapsed in the old rattan chair, not moving, her face pale and filled with despair. Mom sat down and leaned limply against the back of her chair. Her eyes were closed and she said nothing. I could not bring myself to ask what had happened. I fiddled with the cold teacups, more and more nervous. After a long while, Mom gestured for me to sit down beside her. Yesterday's workers' revolt had an article on the front page about the Jiang family. She had to stop for breath. It said that the Jiangs were a big landlord family in Nanjing that owned over 3,300 acres of land and lots of businesses. They were so rich that people called them the half city Jiangs. Would you go by a paper? I want to look at it. I blinked my eyes in confusion but could not get up. Mom nodded in the direction of the untouched teacups on the table. The people who were just here came to investigate. Your cousins were mentioned in the article and they wanted to know more about them. I did not hear the rest of what Mom was saying. My mind was swimming. Half city Jiangs and 3,300 acres of land. Everybody read the Workers' Revolt. Suddenly, I pictured my teachers and classmates reading the sensational article, passing it around and gossiping about it. Zhang Jili's family is the half city Zhangs, 3,300 acres of land. Somehow, I found myself standing up, a teacup in my hand, and a puddle of spilled tea on the table. Why had my parents hidden these things from me? What else was there? Had Dad really committed a crime? Why hadn't the theater let him come home? And anger rose in me. Didn't they know how hard I'd been working to overcome my family background? Now all my efforts were wasted. I hate landlords. I hate this landlord family, I burst out. They were the first words I had spoken since I got home, and as I turned to leave, I saw tears welling out of Mom's closed eyes. I had not talked to Mom for 2 days. If she asked me to help set the table or to call Jiang to dinner, I did it. But I did not say a word to her. Every time I looked at her, I saw the tears welling out of her eyes, but I could not apologize. As usual, I walked past the police station on the way home from school. When I was past it and almost to the corner, I stopped. I hesitated for a long time, then turned back. It was lunchtime. There was no one in the street in front of the police station. The red light beside the gate seemed to welcome me. I timidly looked inside. The room was so dark that I could not see whether anyone was there or not. I started to turn away. I could come back another time, I told myself. I heard Pudge's snide voice again. Zhang Jili, is your family related to Chiang Kai shek too? My other classmates had stood in excited knots, looking at me over their shoulders before turning back to their gossip. I remembered the jeering chant of the neighborhood boys who had followed me down the alley. Half city Zhangs, half city Zhangs, down with the landlord, half city Zhangs. No, I did not want to have this danged name any more. I had had enough. All my bad luck and humiliation came from the name Zhang. I had seen stories in the paper about people who had changed their names. They had started life anew. If I just dropped my family name, I could be named Ji Li and be lucky just as it meant. I stepped forward. Comrade? I called toward the dark reception room. No one answered. I looked at the directory and headed up the stairs to the household registration office. The sign on the door said Residence Registration, and below that was an even larger sign that said No entrance without permission. There was a barred window about 2 feet square and a huge slogan which occupied one whole wall: Class struggle is the key. I looked through the window. The office was empty, but the lights were on, and I could hear a radio playing behind a plywood partition. Comrade! There was no answer. Comrade? I raised my voice and knocked loudly on the counter. A chair moved inside the office, and a man came out from behind the plywood partition. It was Officer Ma, the policeman in charge of residence registration for our neighborhood. What do you want? He asked impatiently before he even looked at me. Can't you let me have lunch in peace? He waved his chopsticks at me. I'm sorry, sorry, I'm terribly sorry, I said, shrinking back with my school bag in front of me like a shield. What is it? He stared down at me through the window, picking his teeth with his finger. I can wait until you finish lunch, I said apologetically. I asked you what you want, but I don't care if you don't want to tell me. He turned around. Wait, I want to change my name, I said timidly. What? I want to change my name. Change your name? Why? He picked his teeth again. I don't have a good class status, so I want to change my family name. He took his finger out of his mouth and began to pay attention. Good revolutionary action. He opened the door. Come in, come in. I'll be ready in no time. I looked at him nervously. When he came into our alley, he held his head high and spoke in domineering tones. He seemed to swagger and enjoyed having power. I did not trust this sudden friendliness. He pointed me to a chair. Making a clean break with your black family, that's good. We absolutely support you. Break with my family? I did not understand him. Chairman Mayo says you can't choose your class status, but you can choose your future. You couldn't choose the family you were born into, but now that you've grown up, it's time for you to choose your future. You can tell your parents you'll follow Chairman Mayo, not them. If they give you any trouble, just come here and tell us. We'll go to their work units and hold struggle meetings against them." He went on and on, waving his chopsticks. I was totally confused. I had only wanted to break with all those landlords in my family, not with Mom and Dad. Would changing my name mean breaking off relations with them? I thought of Aunt Shen Wen lying in the alley, and Shan Shan walking right past her. "Well, I'll go wash my hands and be back to register you in a minute." And he walked out of the office. I sat in the empty room, picturing telling Mom and Dad that I had changed my name. I jumped up and ran out. The street was still the same. The sun was shining warmly, and there were few people in sight. I slowly loosened my fist from the strap of my school bag. It was dripping with sweat. I was still sweating as I walked in our back door. On the stairs, I could hear Grandma talking to someone. "Please don't. You shouldn't do that. Please." I stopped and listened. "Please, give me the mop. When you do this, it makes us feel guilty." Grandma's voice was anxious now. I knew who she was talking to then. Song Popo must have come to mop the stairs. Ever since Dad had been detained, she had been doing things for us again. When we were not watching, she came and mopped the stairs. Every few days, she bought some vegetables for us, and sometimes she even washed them and chopped them. Grandma tried to stop her, but Song Popo would not listen. "Mrs. Jiang, don't worry, it's nothing. I just do it when I don't have anything to do. I did it for so long. I just can't get used to not doing it. Besides, you're having hard times right now and you need help. Don't worry, I won't let anybody see me." It sounded like Grandma went into the apartment. I was sure Song Popo had gone back to her mopping. Suddenly, I found myself weeping. What everyone else was saying about us did not make any difference to Song Popo. She treated us just the way she always used to. Life couldn't be easy for her either, since she no longer had a job. She was still concerned about others. I felt ashamed. I had been selfish and inconsiderate. Life was difficult for me, but it was even more difficult for Mom. How could I think of hurting her this way? I heard Song Popo go back to her room. I ran in and gave her a hug. "Be careful, child, be careful. I'm just bringing this bowl of soup to your mother." "I'll take it," I said. And that's where we'll stop for today.